So now we will be understanding something about VBA. In the initial approach, we have seen what are macros, how the macros are created, and how a macros is executed by Excel. We also saw how the backend processing of macros work. So there is a VBA code written by the macros, and macros are just the recorded step, but all the steps which I had recorded are being converted into the coding approach of VBA. So let's understand what is VBA and let's try to see how it would be implemented with certain set of examples and the use cases of VBA. So if I want to talk upon VBA, VBA stands for Visual Basics Analysis, also known as Visual Basics Application. Now, when it comes to VBA part of Excel, many people think that it's only based on the coding approach. And that's correct because you have to be known with the code approach or the coding scenario with respect to Microsoft Excel. It comes into the developer tab of Excel and it helps in the development of processes in terms of automating the task, in terms of creating certain processes for our day-to-day activities, which could be not executed again and again, and it could be automatically created with the help of VBA. Now, VBA needs a good set of understanding of its coding background as well as a good set of use case for the same. So, we will see what are VBAs and how Excel uses VBA in terms of generating certain outcomes. So, when I talk upon VBA, as said, that Visual Basic Analysis. Excel VBA in Microsoft Programming Language. It's in all the Microsoft software which is there, and it helps us to create human readable codes, to create programming language, and that programs the human readable codes which we have written could be edited, could be changed, and they could also be created in the form of macros. So, we have seen in the earlier example that how a macro is created and how the macro approach was converted into the VBA code. Now, let's see how a VBA code would be created. But before going to creation of VBA, let's understand few terminologies which are required to be known when we are creating a VBA. So, when I go on this, few important terms and key concepts are of primarily known or are of primarily important to be known when you are creating something called as VBA. So, here are certain custom list of things which needs to be known. The very first thing which you all must be known as modules. Now, what are modules? Modules are nothing but containers. Now, as you know that when I want to store something, I will create a container. So, module acts the same into my Excel or the development part of Excel in the VBA. So, it will act like a container in terms of storing things. It stores lots of codes, lots of functions, lots of processes. So, modules are containers of VBA code where procedures and functions are stored. When I talk upon objects, now as said, VBA is an object-oriented language. Now, what is the meaning of object? Everything, every element is known as what? An object. A thing where the data is being stored, or an object which specifies something. So when I talk upon Excel being object oriented, which means every element of Excel is an object. So if I want to access my VBA, obviously I need to open the app, then I need to open the workbook, then I need to go to the tab, then I need to open the module, and then I will access the VBA for the same. So one below the another. That things are what? Objects. Workbook is an object, worksheet is an object, tab is an object, the container, the module which is created is also an object which will help me to access the same. So objects are building blocks of VBA. They represent elements like workbook, worksheets and cells because all of them have been a part of the data and that's when the data is stored and could be manipulated the same. So that's what an object is. Now, when I talk upon procedures, as the name suggests, procedure means there will be some process, something which will happen. Now, when I am creating procedures, obviously I will do step by step. So, procedures are step by step instructions which you give to your Excel in the development part in order to create that logic. So procedures are the block of codes, that is the step-by-step approaches that perform specific tasks. Let's say if I want to perform a task of inserting a value, if I want to perform a task of applying an if-else, so that line of code which I will write is nothing but my procedure. So procedures are nothing but block of codes that perform specific tasks, often categorized as sub-procedures or functions. So they are known as sub-procedures or they are also known as functions. So in both the way we can create the procedures. Now then comes statements. Obviously statement is something which you want to give, some instructions which you want the Excel to perform, the VBA to perform. So statements are the instruction within a procedure. Means what do you want to perform? What type of statements, what type of outcome do you require over here? So these are the instruction within the procedure that tells Excel. Now it's not particularly Excel because as we know that VBA is not only for Microsoft Excel, it could be done with Microsoft Word or Access. So here it tells my Excel or Word or Access what actions to perform, means what I need to do into those procedures. Now variables. Now you know that variables are nothing but helping me to store certain data value, to give certain data value. So variables store data that can be used and manipulated within your codes. And then comes your logical statements. As we have studied about logical statements, it will help us to make some decisions and it will also help us to give certain result sets. So they will include operators such as and, or, and not. So these are certain key important factors, these are certain key important words which needs to be created, which needs to be known, which needs to be understood when you are working and understanding something about VBA. Let's try to see how the VBA works and how the VBA would be created. So let's get started. If you see my file which is available, obviously when I open this file, I have this data available. I have a data set which is saying employee IDs, salesman, total sales, remark, apply remark yes for the salesman having total sales greater than 30 lakh, 3 lakh, and apply no for salesman less than or equals to 3 lakh. Now in order to do this, what do I need to write? Obviously I would like to write a logic of if else. Now why if else? Because I have one criteria to be satisfied. If the condition is satisfied, do some task. If not, do some another task. So if you can see in this data, I need to do. But before going and creating a VBA for the same, let's try to see some simple approaches of creating a VBA. For that, we need to have a developer tab with us. So in the developer tab, we'll get something called as VBA. If you guys don't have developer tab, how to get it? You just have to click anywhere on this ribbon, just right click and you can see customize ribbon as an option. You can go over here. For me, developer tab is open because I want that developer tab. If you don't require it, you can get it done. Let's say I have got it over here and I do OK. So a developer tab is available to me. When I go into the developer tab, you can see there is Visual Basics given, which will help me to give a user interface. There is macros as an option. So record macros, use relative referencing, macro security, that's there. There is an option of add-ins which I require into Excel and many more. I would like to go into the code region of my tab where I would find the VBA approach. Now I can go and click on here in terms of opening this. Now my VBA was already open, so that's why it is showing this. Let me close it and open it again for you. So if I go and open it over here, as you can see, this is how the VBA looks. Now, as you can see, this is a project area where you can find the code file or the Excel file on which you are working upon. So here you can see VBA project. Here my file name is macros in VBA, and you can see the same name of file is being opened. Now, as I said that everything in VBA is object oriented. What is the meaning of object oriented? If I would have not opened Excel, I would have not gone to this file. So Excel workbook, Excel as an application is there. And then when I open this workbook, here you can see there are Microsoft Excel objects. Object is that is holding something. Now you can see what all objects do we have. You can see I have objects such as sheets, sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3, sheet 4, sheet 5. So this workbook, you can see it is talking all about this workbook. So when I am hovering on each of the sheet, you can see something below is changing. What is this? This is nothing but the properties part of my VBA. It will talk upon the properties associated with each sheet. And as you can see, sheet 1, it is naming me the sheet, the name of the sheet, macros 1. You can see sheet 2 as an object is telling me that macros 2, VBA 1, VBA 2, function, and so on, and the properties are eventually changing for the same. Now it's not about only objects of sheets, but there is something called as modules. As I said, modules will help me to store my codes, to store my logics, where my logics, codes, functions, procedures would be stored and kept. So here you can find modules. If you are starting from the very first time, you will not get anything which is created below. I had created few, so that's why it is showing me this. Now imagine that I open another Excel workbook. Let me go over here and let me open. So if I do Control O, it is asking me to open another workbook. Let's say the data cleaning part which we used, or let's say the practice data which we used earlier. So that is what I have opened over here. And if I go into my VBA now, you can see how many objects are open. The first object, the first project is what? Is the macros VBA. And then later on, what do you have? There are modules which are there. You can see there is a second project because we opened second worksheet. So all the things associated with that worksheet are being found over here. So here you can see there are multiple objects, such as we have different sheets as data navigation, this, data validation, and so on. So each sheet information is there, and there are no modules being created in that sheet, so there is nothing related to modules. So as you can see, all the things, as you open another file, that will also be shown over here, and multiple sheets would also be created for the same. So let me close it, and you can see changes happening over here. Let me close it over here. I'll do save. And when I go over here, you can see it is only showing that particular workbook for me. That is macros and VBA. So this was the object part, where if you don't open your workbook, then don't open your worksheet, you won't be able to access over here. So each object needs to be opened or needs to be accessed in a particular manner. If I go over here, this is what? This is the properties. So sheet 1, VBA, sheet 2, VBA. Everything is mentioned over here. If you don't want it, you can remove it. Let's say if I go in insert, you can see, let's say view, properties explorer, properties window, it will be given to you. If you don't want it, you can remove, let's say view, and from here you will get the properties window, and there is a shortcut key given for the same. Let's say I want to open my VBA not from here. There would be some shortcut key associated with the same. So for that also we have a shortcut key. The shortcut key is Alt and F11. Now my function keys are accessed with the Fn key associated in my keyboard. But for some of them you can directly press Alt and F11. So I'll do Alt F9 and F11, and you can see the VBA part, the VBA tab is available to me. There are lots of options available to us, that is File tab, Edit, View, Insert, Format, Debug, Run, and so on. Let's try to create something with VBA. And here I'll go and create modules. If the modules part is not available over here, no need to worry. You can go in this insert and you can get something called as module. So if I click on module, you can see there is a module given and the name of the module is given. The name of the module is module 2. Let's say I remove from here and I'll write it as basic. And I enter. You can see basics as a module being created. Now, if I want to write some codes, how will I write it? I'll go over here. I'll start the code as sub. Now, what is the meaning of sub? Sub means sub-procedures, subroutines. Every function, every logics, as I said, there is something called as procedures, processes, which will store my lots of codes or lots of logics or a block of code which I would write into the development part of my Excel over here. So I'll write sub. In this sub, what I would like to write is basic insert. Now, no need to give any space into the function name. Now, after this, I'll give brackets. These are curly brackets, the function brackets, which we call known as parentheses. And when I press enter, you can see something called as end comes, because if you're starting a procedure to be created, it should also be ended. So when you press enter, this will be shown. Message box. You can give a prompt for that message box. You can see message box as a value is available to us. So message box, and you can give a prompt. The value is 5. Let's say I do this and let us have this approach and let me execute it. So when I run it, you can see a message box is given to us. That is, the value is 5. If I do OK, if I write the value is Excel and I'm running it from here, you can see what it is mentioning. The value is Excel because I'm writing a function logic of message box. So message box is created for the same. Now I can do OK and let me remove this. And I would like to write something else. Now I wanted to add a comment. Now what is the meaning of comment? Comment is something which will be a human readable approach, but my Excel development part or the coding bit is not going to understand it because it will be ignored when the code is being executed. So in order to add this comment, you have to write the logic is based on Excel. So this is a comment being used and you can see it's highlighted in green color. So when things are highlighted in green color and there is a quote, a single quote followed by it, and this is known as a comment. Now comments are something in the development part or the coding bit of the programming language that it is just for the humans to understand, not for the machine to run and execute. So this is also the same. So if I write active cell, I don't know which cell is active, dot value. So active cell dot value, which means whichever cell is active, wherever my cursor is, I want to put up a value of 10. Let's see and let's execute it. And let's see into my file. This cell was activated. This was my active cell and the value has been inserted as 10. If I go over here and I run this code. Let's say I go over here and I execute this code. What it is going to show me at that particular position also, it is going to show me a value of 10. So at that active cell, at that active position, it is going to insert a value. And what is the value which I would like to insert? It is going to be what? 10. So I've inserted it. Similarly, if I want to insert the code is for testing, let's say I insert a text and I execute it. You could see it has been replaced because what was there? There was an active cell. Imagine that I don't want to replace something at an active cell. I want to see something at G3. I want to write something at G3. I want to write something at G5. So let's say if I go over here, instead of this active cell, I write range. Range is, I want to mention cells. G3, that's the cell which I have, G3 dot. Now with this cell, what do you want? You want dot value. What value do you require? I require the value as, let's say, 55. And I execute this code. When I execute this code and I go over here, you can see at G3, the value has been inserted. Now if I run this, if I keep my cursor over here and let me change the value, let's say 100. And if I'm going to execute, if I see over here in the data file, it's executing at that particular location. It is not executing where my cell is actively available. So what does that mean? These are two different functions. Active cell as a function will work wherever the cursor is activated at that particular instance. It will throw out the outcome wherever the cursor is there at that particular instance. Now, range as a function was taking a particular cell position. What was the cell position did I mention? The cell position which I mentioned was G3. So no matter what happens, I'm going to different cell positions, my value is going to change only for that particular cell. So that was the use of range as an approach. Now, if I go over here, and if I write range G3 dot value, instead of dot value, let's say there is something called as interior dot, and if I want a color to be added, which color I would like to add? Let's say if I go over here and I'll go in home, in this color part, you can go and it is asking for gold accent 4. Let's say this color which is there. I can add any color for the same, or there is a color known as VB green. Let's see if it works. And when I execute it, you can see at that particular position, the value has been replaced as 10. And at that particular instance, the color has been given as green. So this is how I can execute. This is how I can write the code. The basic VBA codes which we have written over here. So this is how a simple approach of writing VBAs are there. Obviously, you need to be known with the coding aspect. You need to be familiar with the coding part of your VBA in terms of what all values are there, how the functions are being used, what is the purpose and what is the use of active cell, range, and what more new things are there apart from this. So this was just a simple introduction of how a VBA code is written. So now this sub as basic insert, this is a procedure. Procedure also known as subroutine. Now what does it say? It is a procedure which has some process stored into it. Some process in the sense some task, some code logic stored into it. And this is one step which is being stored. So I can go, let me remove this over here and let me run it one by one. So if I run it directly from here, what it is happening, all the codes are running, all the codes are executing, and then the changes are observed. Imagine that I'll go in run, let's say this debug, and in this debug I have something called as step into. This could be accessed with F8 key, that is a function 8 key. Now if I do step into, you can see how the process is starting. It is starting. The first step, the first task which will be executing is sub insert. Now if I go in this and again I click on it, what is the next step after that? Step into will execute things step by step. Now if I go and see my data file, you can see it's there. Nothing is being there. Now if I go in debug and do step into again and see my code file, you can see the first step has been executed. So 100 is being executed. The next step where the highlight is there into my code is giving it a green color. So I can go over here, and if I go in debug and do a step into again, you can see a green color would be given. You can see a green color is given, and then if I go over here in debug and do step into, the code has been executed. The code is done. So this is how you can run your logics and see how it is being executed line by line, as well as you can also run all the codes similarly in terms of just running it by run. So when you do just run, it will execute all the codes at once, but when you debug and run it one by one at a time, what it will do, one by one the code would be executed line by line. So this was the basic introduction of creating a VBA. Now we will see how few more Now, as we have seen these are some basic approaches of using VBA in terms of just showing you that this is how a procedure is created and this is how it would be executed. Now, let's see few more examples of creating VBA and let's try to solve the approach which we all had, a question which we saw in the initial approach or the initial part. Let me close it as such and let me open it again. So, as you saw over here, what is the question? Apply remark yes for the salesman having total sales greater than 3 lakh, and apply remark no for salesman less than or equals to, applies remark no less than or equals to 3 lakh. This is what I wanted to do. So if I wanted to do something like this, how I would do it? So I'll go and open Alt F11. So I have opened it over here and let me create another module. I can right click over here instead of going and inserting from here. I can also right click over here and then there is an option of what? And insert. Now with this insert as an option, I'll go in something called as module and let's try to create some approach. So as we are starting a module creation with something called as sub what? Let's say with this sub, what I'm trying to do is if, okay. So I have to write if else logic. I'm writing the name of the module as if else logic and I'm giving a parenthesis. And when I enter, the sub would be created and it would be ended. Now what do I want? I want, let's say, if, what is the criteria? That is, let's say, range. C, what is the range value? Let's see. What is the criteria over here? This, D5. So let us write if D5 dot value. If the D5 cell dot value is equals to, but it's not equals to as per the condition, it should be what? Greater than 3 lakh. So it's greater than 3 lakh. What you have to do then you have to do range. Now, which cell I want to replace with? So in this cell, what I want to write? I want to write yes. So what is the cell number over there? E5. So if I go over here and I write E5 dot value, this is what I want. Range D5 dot value is greater than 3 lakh. Then range E5 dot value equals to yes. Yes, the salesman would be rewarded with the incentive. If not, I'm going to write something called as else, which means if this condition is not satisfied, I'm going to write the value as no. Now, if I'm writing if else, this is very important. When you're writing if else over here, indentation matters. Now, what is the meaning of indentation? Indentation is the space. As you can see, there is the space which is given, which makes sure that things are into if. But let's say when you want to come out of if, you are coming out of that indented space. So when you come out of that indented space, the else should be just besides your else. The else should be just besides your if. So if I write else and then I write range E5 dot, let's say I write something called as value. Value is equals to what? No. This is what I want. So as you can see, else, this is how it's being added, and I can take it into indentation again. Now when the if is created, there is else. The if creation has started, but you have not ended it. So this code is still incomplete. So what you have to do is, all the indented spaces are done. So you have to come out and you have to write end if. So the if would be ended over here. So this procedure has been created. This is how a simple if else is written. Not only in VBA, but in few of the programming languages such as Python and all. If else has some approach of writing, and this is how a syntax of writing if else is. Now what is syntax? Syntax is nothing but a structure, a basic structure of writing if else. As you can see, I have created a subroutine, a sub-procedure, which is named as if else logic. And in that if else logic, I have written if the range of that D5 is greater than 3 lakh, then E5 cell will be named with the value of yes. Else, if that condition is not satisfied, go to else. And with that else, range of E5 dot value is going to be what? No. If I do this and if I execute it, let's say it is executed, let's see how it has happened and what it has given me as an answer. It has given me as an answer as no. Now what does no means over here? The no over here means that at that particular instance, that value is not being considered over here. It is stated as no. Now, what should I do? Let's say I want to change for this part as well. So for this, let us try to run the code which we have created in VBA. Now, if I want to go over VBA, then run it, then execute it, it's a big task for me. So what I can do is, let me close this window and I can go in my developer part. In the macros, you can see if else logic, which we did, which we created. So that is also in the macros, that is also a code which is being executed with the name of an if else. You can get it from here and then you can try to run it. Let me remove it. And then let's say I want to do it over here. So let's say I go in macros and if else logic and then run it. Why it is only executing at that part and not in the rest of the cells? The simple logic over here is that it's a simple if else logic. And when you have written if else logic, you have used range function, and in that range function, you have specified the cell position. The cell position over there, which you have mentioned, that is E5. That is, it is changing in what cell? It's changing in the E5 cell. So no matter which cell is activated, it is going to change in what cell? In the E5 cell, only at that particular position. Now, let's see. Let's try to change or edit the code and see what all changes we can see. I can go over here and in this code, instead of range.e5 value. Now checking criteria, range d5 means at the d5 position, the value should be greater than 3 lakh. That's what I require and that's it if I want it. Then range e5 dot value. That is at the e5 position dot value. It should be what? Yes. But I am not writing that. It should only give at e5. Let's say whichever cell is active at that position, it should give me E5. So I can write active cell dot value. So active cell dot value is going to be what? E5. Same goes over here. I will write active cell dot value. And when I do Control S, this is being saved. And I go over here, the code has been edited, executed. If I go over here in the macros part, if else logic, and I run it, you can see I keep my cursor over here, go into macros, if else logic, and then run it. You can see at that position also, it is showing me no. But yes, the no is valid over there. If I take the value over here, that is 3,50,000, and let's see if it is giving me yes or not. So when I go over here, I'll go in macros, and then if I do if else logic and execute it, it is still giving me no. What would be the reason of giving me no? Is into the criteria, it's into the condition which we have been using. Now what is that? Let's see. If you see over here, what is the value? That is range D5. It is always checking at what? Checking at D5. No matter whichever cell you select, but it is always checking a position value. The if condition is being always looked for D5 as a cell. And that value is being compared, that is it greater than 33 lakh or not. If it is not, then it is throwing me as yes. If it is, then it is throwing me as no. Sorry. So if the value is greater than 3 lakh, it is throwing me as yes. If the value is less than 3 lakh, it is throwing me as no. So as you can see, D5. What is the D5 value? So D5 is this. Is it greater than 3 lakh? The answer is no. And you can see over here. But when I see for this, if you see in the function, it is still asking for which cell? D5 cell. And at that position, it's still what? It's still no. And that's why the answer, even if at this position, the value is greater than 3 lakh, it is showing me as no. Why? Because in the criteria, in the condition, the cell being used is my D5, where the position of the value or the actual value which is stored is less than 3 lakh. That's why you can get no over here. So if I want to solve this logic, I cannot use a simple if-else logic. I need to use something called as loops. So we will see how the loops will execute, but the main intention to show you if-else logic, that this is how an if-else logic is created, this is how an if-else logic is executed, and this is how you can look and take help of the code in terms of creating few functions, few values, and you can also write certain logics for the same. So this was all about the if-else logic, which we saw, a simple if-else logic which we saw with respect to our VBA. We will try to enhance this further with the approach of for. So I hope till the if-else part you are clear with the same. As we have seen in the earlier example of if-else, that we were able to write an if-else VBA logic, but it was not being executed for all of them. Let's try to use and apply logic for all the cells with the help of a looping criteria. Now, what is the meaning of looping criteria over here? Looping criteria is nothing but the looping structure which I would like to add in over here. Now, in terms of creating loop, there are certain steps needs to be taken into consideration. Let's see how, and let's try to learn a new approach, a new thing related to a procedure which we have created over here, or the VBA logic. So when I go into the VBA bit which is being created, so a VBA bit which is being created, as you can see what it was doing and what were the challenges being faced. Earlier the challenge was that it was only changing at the E5 cell, and replacing it, what we did, active cell dot value is equals to yes, that's what we did. Then active cell dot value is equals to no, that's what we also did over here. But the only criteria, the only thing which needs to be there is range d5 dot value. Why? Because it was only checking at d5, it was not checking at all the cells which were there. So in order to ask to all the cells which are there, let's try to see how we can do it over here. So we would like to create something called as dim. Now dim as an approach is helpful for us in terms of creating a variable. Now what is a variable? Variable is something which will hold some value with us. Now what is the meaning of some value? Some value means some data element. Now let's say I'm creating a variable known as x. Now what does that mean? That I am creating a variable, a parameter or a container, let's say, with named as x, which will have some value. But when we create variables in our VBAs or in our sub-procedures, subroutines, you need to mention the data type. So x as what? Now x will hold what? That you need to mention. So in terms of mentioning that x is going to hold what we are going to do? X as. Now as what? As an integer, as a value, as what type of data it is going to select. Now how will I get to know that what type of data would be selected over here? So there are certain data types which are available in Excel VBA. As you can see on my screen, the common data types declared with dim include, the first one is an integer. Integer is nothing but a whole number, a whole value. Then there is long. So a larger whole number, a longer range whole number. Then there is double. Double is nothing for the decimals. Then there is something called as string. String is nothing for a textual data as such. Booleans, which will have something such as true and false. Range, which will take specific ranges of cells into consideration. And then there is something called as variant. Now variant is one of the flexible type of data when it comes to giving or assigning data types to variables, and it's by default available, which means if you don't mention a data type, it will take it by default as variant. Now variant means it will exist according to any type of data which you give. So over here, what it is giving or what it is trying to say. So variant, a flexible type of data, can hold any data type automatically. It is set when no type is declared. So these are the various data types. Let's say I want to go from one particular cell to another. So if I want to go from one particular cell to another, I want the cell numbers not to be long. Long is a longer range of cell numbers. No, they are small cell numbers which are there. Let's say 2, 3, 4. It's a small number. It's not a big number as such. So I can use integer. I will not use decimal or let's say double over there because it's not a decimal. The number of the cell is a finite value which is there. So I'll not use double over here. I can also not use string because string as a data type, I don't think so will be helpful for us because we are seeing if the number is greater than 3 lakh or not. Obviously, the data needs to be in number. It should not be in string because for a string, greater than 3 lakh or not would not be a justifiable condition. For booleans, let's say true and false, I'm not checking the data for true is greater than 3 lakh or not or false is greater than 3 lakh or not. No. Range of cells, I want to see one position at a time. So range of cells is also not being an importance over here. And variant, it will hold any type of data. So for me, I would be selecting integer as a type of data for my dimensions. And x is a variable being created which is going to hold what? Hold an integer for me. So let's see. So if I say x is what? X is integer. Now you can see x as integer. Now as over here means alias. What is the meaning of alias? X as means denoted as an integer. So x is being aliased over here and I'll write x. Let's say small x equals to. What is the range of cells? From where till where? I want to repeat it. So the cell number over here is 5. The row number over here is 5. And then it needs to go till what? Till 14. So here from 5 to, let's say something called as 14. So when I give x from 5 to 14, this is not an ideal condition which needs to be given. And if you do something like this, it will give you compilation error that the statement is ended and this is a wrong type of code which you have written. But I want to mention, I want to run this code from 5 to 14. So how will I do it? We'll have something called as for loop. Now what is the meaning of a for loop? For loop means it is an iterative loop. Now what is the meaning of iterative? What is the meaning of a loop? Loop in simple terms is a block of code. It is a programmable construct which execute a given set of instruction n number of times, which means the logic which I will write, that logic is going to be repeated n number of times. So that is a simple approach of what? A loop. Now, which loop would be helpful? We have different types of loops and I would be expecting to use a for loop. And as I said earlier, iterative. What is the meaning of iterative? Iterative means it traverses, it travels, it goes to each and every element of the sequence. Now, what is the meaning of each and every element of the sequence? Let's say I want to run this logic from D5 to, let's say, D14. So I want this logic to not only be executed in D5, which we saw earlier, or with respect to D5, which we saw earlier, I want this logic to travel from D5 to D6, from D6 to D7, D7 to D8, till it reaches D14. And in order to achieve that, I would use something called as for loop. Now, how does a for loop helps over here and how it would be executed? Let's try to see. So I will write something called as for x is equals to 5 to 14. So I have x starting from 5 to 14 and here the indentation again matters. If I have to mention that these things are happening within this, I have to mention something like this, active cell, else to be a part of this. Let me remove it and write it again. Let's say I write if. Now the approach of writing if also slightly changes. How? I'll write cells. Cells from what? Now when I'm using cells as a function over here, what it is asking? It is asking me a row index number and a column index number. Now what does that mean? I am mentioning the loop should run from 5. So if I go into the sheet, it should run from D5 to D6 to D7 to D8 to D9 till it reaches what? D14. So my loop, that is my code logic, is being executed n number of times from D5 to D14. So I know the row number over here. The row number is what? The row number is 5. So let x be that row number, because x is going to be changing from 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8 and 8 to 9. So I'll write something called as x over here, because x is a variable which holds value from 5 to 10. The initial value over here is what? It's 5, comma. Now what's the column index number? Now it's if. Now what is the meaning of if? If will help me to test a condition. Now what condition needs to be tested? X, that is 5, at D, that is column. Now I cannot write D over here because column index is being asked. Now what is the meaning of index? There is a difference between a column name and a column index. Index in general, in terms of programming, is nothing but a position of element. Now what are the different or various positions available for the elements? Let's see here. What are the positions? This is position number 1 of column. So the index position over here is 1. This is position number 2. This is position number 2. This is position number 3. And this is position number 4. So what is going to happen over here is, if I want to check at D5, so x is obviously 5 for me. Now for D being taken into consideration, I cannot write D. But what is the position of D? The position of D over here is nothing but 4. So the column index, as said, index is nothing but the position of data. So what is the position of that column? It's nothing but 4. So I would like to add something called as 4 over here. 4. So x dot 4. Now what is the value of x? X is nothing but 5. 4 is nothing but D. So when the code executes, it will check at D5. It will check at D6. It will check at D7. It will check at D8. It will check at D9 till it reaches D14. Dot value, obviously. And this value needs to be checked greater than or equals to 3 lakh. I have written this. And then when this condition is mentioned, this condition is satisfied, you can see when I press enter, this value has been sorted very nicely. So if cells x comma 4, now what is the x over here? X is nothing but the row number and 4 is nothing but the column number. Now D5 is being considered. If it's greater than 3 lakh, what do I want to do? I want to print at a particular cell. Now I'll write cells again. Cells with cell x and 5. Now why I have written 5 over here? What is the reason behind it? If I go into my sheet, this is the 4th column. This is the 5th column where I want the value to be printed. I want the value to be given as an outcome. So if I want to use it, what is the position of this column? It's 5 because D was at 4th position. So I will write something called as 5. What it is doing, D5 dot value equals to, I'll write equals to as yes. So what is happening in this code. I know it seems to be complicated, but if we understand things one by one, we will be able to understand what we have done. Let's try to think again what we have done till now from the beginning, as we were earlier having a code of simple if else, but it was only checking for D5 cell as a value and the condition was given as an output. But I wanted it to check for all the cells. Now what is the cell number which is there? It is starting from 5 and we have to check till 14. So if you see in our data, the information is starting from D5 for the particular amount or for the particular sales value which were there, and it is going till D14. So I want my logic, I want my code to run from D5 to D14 and give some outcome in E column. So for that, I am running a loop. Now, as I said, what is a loop? Loop is a programming construct which runs or executes n number of times. How many times I have to run? I have to run from D5 to D14. So whatever cells comes in between, for all of them it would be executed. So now I have created an integer for the same because x is going to be a value 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on. Why I have considered integer? Because it's going to be a cell number for me, and cell number is a whole number. It's never a decimal. Now, if I write for the loop, I want to execute from 5 to 14. So it's a for loop executing from 5 to 14. Now, after that, what do I require? I require to check the condition. What is the condition which I want to check? That is cells. Now, why I am considering cells as a factor? Because now it is intersecting position. Now, what is the meaning of intersecting? Intersecting is checking the position. If you go over here, if I want to replace something over here, I need to check that is it greater than 3 lakh or not. So if I select this, if I do control this, so which cell I want to use and look for is D5. After that, I have to look at D6, D7. But cells as a function is not taking column name. It is taking column indexes. Now, what is the meaning of column index? Column index is nothing but the position of the column. This is column 1, this is column 2, this is column 3, this is column 4. So, it needs to check at 5th row and 4th column. So, as I am repeating it again, it needs to check the data at 5th row and 4th column. So, as I have written cells x, 4, what is that x? X is the value of cells which will be changing as it executes one after the another. The initial value of x is 5. So, it is checking 5, 4, that is at D5, and it will be giving me the value. Now, value needs to be printed where? The value needs to be printed here. Now, what is the cell position over here? The cell position of column is 5 and of row is 5. So, let x be over there and the column position is what? 5. So, x, 5 is being there and I want to print it as yes. So, this is what I have written till now. Let's try to write an else condition when this criteria would not be satisfied. So, I will write something called as else. Now, make sure your else is not coming over here. When it comes over here, which means you are out of the loop. The loop has been ended. You are out of the loop over here. So, you have to be inside the loop. So, just below your if, your else should come. Because when your if stops executing, you have to execute your else. Else what? I'll write cells x, 5 dot value equals to what? No. This is how it there. So, it will check at 5, 4, that is D5, and if it is greater than 3 lakh, it will mention 5, 5. 5, 5 means it is going to be at E5. E5 is going to be replaced with yes. If the condition is not true, then it is going to go and execute something called as else. So if will be executed only when the given condition is true, and else will be executed when the given condition has been proven as false. So if I go over here and I'll write end if, because the if logic has been ended over here. The if has been ended over here. You have to maintain that indentation because this indentation plays a primary role. And I want to write something called as next x. Now what is the meaning of next x over here? Next x means after 5 I need to go and execute for 6. After 6 I need to go and execute for 7, 8, 9, 10, till what? Till 14. So this is a code which we have modified with the help of for loop. So if I run it, you can see the code is being executed. If we go on a cell, the outcomes are here. So in order to create this simple approach, we need to write a VBA code, and the VBA code logic was having lots of factors taken into consideration. So I hope you understood that how a for is working. Let's see and let's debug one by one. So what is happening? Let me show you over here. And let me write cells x comma 5. Let's say x comma 5 dot. It's not having that color, so let's be like that. So I'm having this part, and let us run this code one by one. So let me first remove this. So I'll select this, put delete, and I'll go over here. This is there. I can select this and run this simultaneously all at once. I'll save it, and in this debug, you can see in debug what it is going in step into. For that, shortcut key is there, function F8. So let's say F8 key, it's not executing for me, function F8, yeah. So here you can see what is the first part, what is the first step which needs to be executed over here. This is the first step which needs to be executed, subject if else, which is there. Is there any changes happening? No, as you can see. Now, if I do F8 again, you can see it's asking for x is equals to 5 to 14. So it is considering that cell. Are there any changes happening? No, as you can see. Now let's see in our code, if I press Fn F8 again, it is checking the criteria. Now in this step, it is checking the criteria. Now, is there any change happening over here? No. Let's see. If I do Fn F8, you can see it never went into this code or this statement. Why? Because the first condition which was there was false. Now what is the meaning of that? That when the data went over there and checked, this was the criteria. When it went over there and checked, the value was less than 3 lakh. So if statement was false. So instead of going into cell dot the values as yes, it jumped into else. Because when the condition is false, it will jump to else. It will never execute if. So here, if I press Fn F8, you can see this is what it is trying to print now. If I do Fn F8, the if else has been ended. And when I see my code, you can see it's going to print me as no. If I go here again, what it is going to do, Fn F8. You can see next. Now what it is taking, after 5, it will consider the row number as 6. So if I take Fn F8, it's going over here, Fn F8. Now after the first condition, it is coming to the else. It will execute when the given condition is true. Let's see what is the condition, what's the value over here. What's the value over here? It's 3,20,000. Obviously, it's greater than 3 lakh. So this condition is true, and that's why it jumped to this. When I do F and F8, you can see the if has been ended by printing what? Printing yes. Similarly, you can go over here and it will go now to next. Next means after 6, it will check the 7. So here you can see for some of them it's going into if. When the condition is not met, it is going into else. So this is how line by line the code is executed. And this is how it's being printed for us. So here when you press F8, you can see the debug part of code where step by step the code is executing. And the code has stopped. Let's see if all the values are being done. Yes, all the values are being done and the code has stopped executing. So this was a simple example of what? Simple example of a for loop. So this is how a for loop works. This is how a for loop is executed, and this is how a for loop is being created into our VBAs. So as I can go and remove this, and I go in macros and execute it. Let's say if else logic and it was running, you can see the outcomes are given for us for the same. So this is all about something called as VBAs created with if else logic, where we understood what are dimensions. Dimensions are creating variables which will hold some value for us, and how a looping structure is created, how one after the another execution would be created with the logic which you write in your Excel. So this was all about a for loop logic into our VBA. I hope you have understood the same. So that's all for the for loop approach. Now let's see how we can create a nested if else. Now you all must be knowing nested if else. If I say that this is a criteria being given, total sales is greater than 1 lakh. Let's say 10 lakh over here. The incentive percent is going to be how much? 30% incentive. Now it's greater than 5 lakh, greater than or equals to 5 lakh, then the incentive is going to be somewhat, let's say 15%. If it's greater than 3 lakh, greater than or equals to 3 lakh, it's 8%. And if not, it is going to be what? If it is less than 3 lakh, the incentive percent given to the sales executive is going to be 0. That's what we want to see over here in terms of this. Let's try to execute it with the code which we will be creating. Now let's try to create one by one how the code would be executing, and let's try to create the logics for the same. So incentive is a column where I want to run this code over here. Now let's try to check the positions before proceeding further, because you know that we understood the column indexes and row indexes over here. So what are the row numbers from where we want to execute the code? From 3 as a roll number, I want to execute the code till 12. So row indexes is this. Where I want to check? I want to check in D as a column. So what is the position of the column? This is column 1. This is column 2, this is column 3, this is column 4. You can see it's written as 4C. So 4C means 4th column. Now, where I want to print this value? I want to print this value at 5th column. So 5C, that's what I require. Let's try to see how this logic would be executed in our code. So, if I go over here, let me create a new module, because we have lots of things going on into this module. Let's create a new module for us. So I'll go in insert, and in the So let's try to create a VBA for the same. So if I go here in the Visual Basics, this is the logic which we have, but let's not try to change it over here. Let's try to create a new module for the same. So if I go and insert a module, you can see a module is being inserted. Now I'll name this module as incentive person. I can name this module. So let's say the module is being named as incentive person. So when I open this workbook, I need to go to the developer tab and I need to select this module as incentive person in order to see this VBA. So that's it. And if I go over here, let me create a module. Let's say subroutines, sub-procedures. It will help me to create a processes. Now what is the process name? Incentive. And in this, let me add parenthesis. Now parenthesis is required over here. So after this, you can see creating a sub is incentive. And then there is a logic where it ends the subject, the subroutine which we have. Now what is the logic which we want over here? That is, it needs to create. What it requires to create is, you can see we have this logic and we have this logic as well. Both the logics are there. Now, what is the criteria? What's the condition? That it needs the incentives to be created or incentive percentage to be given for a particular individual, a salesman, but by checking sales. Now, it's not checking sales like it did earlier, like greater than 3 lakh or less than 3 lakh. There are various stages where the check is being happening. That is, if the sales is greater than 10 lakh, or if the sales is greater than 5 lakh, or if the sales is greater than 3 lakh, or else the sales is less than 3 lakh. So those all changes are being happening, those all checks are being happening, and let's see how we can execute the same. As we saw earlier that the ranges is from 3 to 12, and we are going to change at E by looking at D as a column. So 4th position, 5th position. Let's see. How will I do? The same approach which we did earlier. That is, I'll try to use something called as dim. I'll use X. X as. I want this X as in what? As an integer. As you can see, it is acting as an integer. If I take it, now from where till where? This range is happening, this selection is happening. From the cell or the row position of 3 till what? 12. So let's try to do it. So for X equals to 3 to 12. So this is the position being considered. Now here I am writing if else. So if I write if, let me add some space. I'm taking reference of the first routine which we created, the procedure which we created, but we will be doing some tweaks over here as well. So if, as you all know now how the procedure was created, cells, we know that cells, what is a row number? Row number is going to be my X. What is the column number? Now where I want to see, where I want to find, or where I want to check this condition, I want to check this condition as column D. And at column D, the column position is what? 4. So I will check it over here, and what will I write? I'll write 4. 4 dot value, and this value needs to be checked what? Now as per the first condition which is given, the value needs to be checked that is it greater than or equals to 10 lakh. Then and only then the incentive percent is going to be what? 30%. So let's see. If I go over here, value greater than equals to what? 10 lakh, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Then what is going to change? An indented block. Now indented block, what it will make sure? That if the criteria, if the condition which we have given is true, then it will give something in output. What is the something which I want? Cells X, 5 dot value needs to be equal. Now I will write 0.3. 30% is nothing but 0.3. I can add a format later on. So let's say that's the first condition, and after that if I write else, as per the first condition which we have written, if I write else and I write cells x comma 5 dot what value, and if this condition is not met, it's going to give us what? 0. If I do this and if I end my if as we did earlier in the first example which we saw before this, I did this and I do next. Next x. If I do this and let's say I'm executing this code over here, now you can see the sales were greater than, like less than 3 lakh. So it's 0. 3,20,000 is 0. 5 lakh as a sales is 0. 15 lakh as a sale, not even 15 lakh, 1,50,000 is 0. Now if you see 3,50,000 is 0, then 2,20,000 is 0. 1,21,000. Not 1 lakh, it's 12 lakh, sorry. So it's 12,10,000. It is going to give me 3. 31,30,330. It's going to give me 3. Now if you see 2,30,000 is going to give me 0. 6,46,000 is going to give me what? 0. Now for certain of the ranges the value seems to be correct, but for certain of the values, certain of the sales amount, the value doesn't seems to be correct. Why? You can see over here. What was the criteria which was set? That the value, if it is greater than or equals to 10 lakh, it will be having an incentive of what? 30%. If the value which you have, if it is not greater than or equals to 10 lakh, check that is it greater than or equals to 5 lakh or not, which means between that particular range. So is it at that particular instance? If not, then you check that you have 15%, then you have something called as 30%, then you have 8%, and then you have to give 0 for the next criteria when none of the criteria is being met. So the approach which we used with the simple if else needs to be modified a little bit. Now how we would like to modify it? We would like to modify it with the help of something called as nested if else, which means one more if else or elif would be added over here. How will we add elif over here? So let's go. Instead of adding else, I'll add something called as else if. Now when I add else if what it is asking? Cells x comma 4 dot value. Cells x comma 4 dot value, is it greater than or equals to 5 lakh? Then, okay, you can write expected then. You can see this errors needs to be handled very carefully. So if I do cells x comma 5 dot value is going to be what? 0.15. That's what the percentage which we have written. So if I execute this code and I see into my data, you can see for this, the value is greater than or equals to 5 lakh. It is being given as 0.15. So elif is being added over here. Now, what if I want to also check that the value is greater than or equals to 3 lakh or not, and then give a final criteria as if none of the criteria is being met, then give what? 0. That is less than 3 lakh. So I can go over here and I can write something called as else if. Else if what? Cells x comma 4 dot something called as value needs to be greater than or equals to 3 lakh. Then it needs to have values, that is cells x comma 5 dot value is equals to 0.08 because it's 0.8%. So I have to give 0.08. And this is what it's done. And when I execute this code now, you can see the changes which are being observed over here. So as you can see, the sales value is what? It's 2,50,000. So in this criteria, it's going to be in this condition, that is less than 3 lakh. So it is going to give me what? 0. Then 3,20,000. So in this criteria, it is coming over here between 5 lakh and this. So it is going to give me something like this, that is 8%. You can see it's 5 lakh because as it said, it should be greater than or equals to 5 lakh if it is not greater than or equals to 10 lakh. So it is going to give me what? 15%, 0, 0 and so on. So I can go over here, I can go in home, I can apply a format of percentage and you can see the percentage amounts are being given. So this is how a nested if else could also be helpful for us in terms of writing those analysis. So this was all about a VBA, how a VBA would be created with a simple approach of routines, then with the help of normal if else, with the help of nested if else, with the help of for loop as a criteria or a condition, and then we also try to use if else, elif, logics over here. Then we can see that we can also add an AND condition. Now many people say that how will I add an AND condition? It will check it, that is it greater than 10 lakh or equals to 10 lakh, and I can write AND cells dot, not dot, x comma 4 dot value is less than, what it should be less than 5 lakh. That's what it is going to consider over here. Okay, and then needs to be going over here. So here if you can see, then should not come below. So then you have to go at that particular criteria. So as you can see, first it will check that is the condition greater than or equals to 10 lakh and what? Less than or equals to this. But AND will never happen over here, so it could be OR. So you can write AND and OR logics in this manner. So I'm trying to remove it, just this was an example to showcase you all, and this is how my code is being done. So this was all about the VBA approach, and this was all about how the VBAs would be created with different set of logics. As we now saw, creation of multiple subroutines or sub-procedures which were helping me to store certain logics. But what if I create functions? Now you all know what are functions because we had a simple and yet effective definition of functions, that is a pre-created code logic which we would like to use over here. So why not create a function for the same and execute it? Let's try to see how this function is working and how function will be helpful for us in terms of doing certain tasks. So if you see that I have this cell and I have to create a total. Now total of what? I have price each, that is price of each item. I have data related to multiple particulars. Particulars is multiple products such as mouse, keyboard, scanner, printer and so on. And you can see they are belonging to different brands. Now price of each. Let's say mouse of eyeball is being bought by me. It's going to be costing me 400 each. But what if I buy 2 mouses? That is quantity in stock. I need to find out the total, which means the total amount which was paid by me. So instead of writing total, let me write it out as total amount. So total amount paid by me. So similarly, I tried to buy certain, or I tried to purchase certain products with respect to different brands, and then each price was given to me and then the quantities was given to me. For this, we can simply use a function. Now, what function did we use? we used a function such as, let's say, product. You remember this function. Now, product as a function, what it was doing, it was taking number 1, comma, number 2, and it was doing the task of giving me what? 800 as a value. Now you can see, I just have to simply drag in and the task would be done. I can remove and I could also apply a formula. Now you know there is a difference between function and formula. Functions are pre-created code logics and formula is you will write it, you will modify it, you will use it as per your requirement. So if I go over here, star, this asterisk is for multiplication. If I use it over here, and let's say it's going to show me the same value. What if I want to use certain logic and with this total amount, I want to add 2% GST or let's say multiply 2% GST over here. So 2% GST which is giving me what? This value. See, it's giving me this, or else I can add 2% amount over here and this is how it is giving me. So let's not go into over here and let's see how we can modify this value. How? Let's try to create a function for the same. So if in order to create a function, again I'll go in developer tab, I'll open Visual Basics. Now you have lots of subroutines, sub-procedures created. In this only, we will create something called as function. So how will I create it? I'll go in insert, I'll insert a module. But as I said, I am creating a function. Then why I've inserted a module? Because in a module, you can create a sub-procedure or a function. Let's say I write a function. I've written a function. What is the name of the function? Let's say I give the function name as total amount. Same name which I want. Now what's the first value which will be? How many values it will be considered? So let's say quantity is the first value it will be considering, or the price is the second value which it will be considering. And here you can see functions, parameters. You all know that when we execute, when we take help of function, it is asking for some value. So when we will be using this function, it will ask us two values. First is quantity and another is price. Let's see how it works. So I will write something called as total amount equals to, which means the answer would be equals to quantity into price, which was there. This is what the function should consist of. And I'll write some comments. Now comment with this. The function finds as the total amount spent based on quantities and price. This is what we have written, and what you can see over here, it's in green color. Now whenever things are in green color, it's what? It's a comment. Now when I execute this function, when I use this function, when I utilize this function, what it is going to do? Total amount is the name of the function. Now it will take two values. It will accept two values. First is quantity, another is price. And then when the outcome would be given, outcome would be total amount is going to be equals to quantity into price. So this is a function output which we want. I will save it and let's see I can find this function or not. I'll do equals to and I will write total. You can see total amount as a function is being used. So the function which we created is being used over here. Total amount. Total amount is going to ask us what? This. And when I only pass this, it's going to throw me value error. Value error why? So a value used in the formula is of wrong data type. Why? Because it was asking for us how many values? 2. So let's say total amount. comma. What is the next value which was asking is quantity in stock. And you can see here, let's say I'm removing this percentage. It's a general because initially I used this. So it's going to show me what? 800 over here. What if I want to modify this function? So I can go over here. I'll remove these values. I'll go over here and I say after doing this. So let me put this in brackets. It will multiply. Multiply by 0.2. Now 0.2 is 20%. And if I save it, let's say if I go over here, if I take total amount, what it is going to take quantity into price, and then what it is going to give me as 160. Why it is giving me 160 over here? Because it is being multiplying the values. If you see, if I have 400, if I have, let's equals to, I have 400 into 2, and if I do into 0.2, it's going to give me what? 160. So if I add this, so it's going to give me this value. So when I change the formula over there, change the outcome which is required in my function which I created, the similar change has been happened over here when I try to execute the same. So this is how a function would be created. So let's go over here and make it as I wanted, quantity into price. As the function being used, I'll do Control S and I'll use that function similarly over here. So if I do equals to, I'll use total amount, and then I want this to this being used and utilized. I'm using it as a function and then executing it over here. So if you can see, this is how we have created functions. Now you can add n number of logics while creating a function. This was just a simple explanation of how the functions would be created. We have seen pre-created functions or predefined functions which we use, such as sum, product, sumifs, averageifs, VLOOKUPs, HLOOKUPs, and so on. But we can also create functions manually according to our logic, whatever we want to execute in terms of getting some outcome. So this is how a function is being created. So this was all about how an Excel use VBA procedures or a coding bit of Excel in terms of doing certain tasks. We saw that what is VBA, how a VBA would be created, a VBA window, how the VBA coding pane would be given to us, and how those values would be executed. There are certain errors which can come. There are certain errors which you can eliminate as well. So this was all about the VBA approach of Excel in terms of understanding its use case and in terms of the example which we saw. Now there are few more examples which you can also explore in terms of understanding more about the VBA bit. So this was all about this session. This was all about VBA. I hope this is understandable.
Like this video, subscribe to our channel and comment on the concept you want to learn next.